At this point, Your Honor, prosecution calls Detective Tarpon to the stand. Can you state your name for the record, Detective?
My name is Dana Tarpon, spelled Danatarpon.
And what is your occupation, Mr. Tarpon?
I'm a detective in the Harris County Sheriff's Office.
How long have you been a detective?
I've been a detective there 16 years.
What type of crimes do you investigate?
Well, I work in the Crimes Against Children division, so I investigate all crimes against children that include child abuse, child sexual abuse, kidnapping involving children, murders, and domestic disputes.
At this point, Your Honor, we'd like to tender this witness as an expert in police investigation. Did you investigate Sarah's case?
Yes, I was assigned to it.
Based on your investigation and your 16 years of experience and expertise, have you come to a conclusion about what happened to Sarah?
Yes, I have.
And could you please tell us what that conclusion was?
Based on the extent of the investigation and the evidence to hand, I've concluded that Richard Grouper abducted and later killed Sarah Salmon the night that she was disappeared.
Now, is this conclusion based on a reasonable expert with 16 years of experience?
It is based on my professional opinion as an expert and on nothing else.
What time did you get the call about Sarah?
I received a call at about 8 a.m.
And what time did you arrive at the house, Detective?
This was about 8:30 that same morning. This is August 14th, 2002, the day after Sarah disappeared.
Did you question the parents?
Yes, I did.
Did you question any of the neighbors?
Yes, I did.
During your investigation, what were the neighbors' opinions of the Salmons?
Well, the neighbors had positive opinions of the Salmons in general. They particularly noted that Mr. Salmon appeared to be a very caring father. One of the neighbors particularly told me that Mr. Salmon went out of his way to leave work early to see his daughter play in her softball game, junior varsity.
What were the parents' emotional states during the interview?
Well, naturally, they were very distraught. However, they were still able to rationally discuss what occurred the night before.
What did Mr. Salmon say about the night before Sarah's disappearance?
Well, Mr. Salmon told me that at approximately 9:30 that evening, Sarah went to bed. Nothing unusual had happened before that. The evening apparently was fairly straightforward. At 10 o'clock, he went to check on Sarah and found that she was asleep when he checked on her. The morning after, the morning I was called, 6:30 in the morning, he awoke and found Sarah was missing. At that point, called the police.
And did you question the mother as well?
I did, yes. She corroborated much of Mr. Salmon's story and was unable to add very much more. She mentioned that the only unusual thing to occur that evening was that Sarah didn't fight about having to do her homework, but aside from that, she was in her usual spirits. She was lively. She came home from school at the usual time.
After you interviewed the parents and the neighbors, what did you do next?
I had my crime scene investigators conduct a forensic investigation of the house. That involved dusting for fingerprints, checking for DNA samples, checking the garage and the vehicles, and taking fingerprints of the parents and getting whatever evidence I could of Sarah's person, which included, in this case, finding an old child registry form with her fingerprints and taking a sample of her hair from her hairbrush, which would serve as a DNA match.
Was there any evidence of an altercation in the home?
I did not find any, no.
Did the department find any signs of blood in the home, of Sarah's blood in the home? Excuse me.
None was discovered, no.
Did they find any of her blood around the window seal, such as a blood trail?
No.
Was there any blood from the Salmon's home to the defendant's home?
We didn't find any, no.
Now, earlier you said you talked to the neighbors. Did you question Casey Fish?
I attempted to speak with Mr. Fish, but he declined the interview.
After questioning the family and the neighbors, what did you do next? Excuse me, I'm sorry, that was asked. Did you think she had ran away?
I believed that Sarah had simply run away at first. That's a usual occurrence with children of this age, but I couldn't find any motive for that. It was actually in talking to some of the neighbors about Sarah's habits and what she might have done that I learned that Richard Grouper, who's a neighbor of hers, had his motorhome parked in front of his house the night that Sarah disappeared, but that it was gone the morning that I was called in to investigate.
Did you know that Mr. Richard Grouper was a sex offender?
I knew Mr. Grouper of old, yes. He had come into my office and filled out a sex offender registry form, and so I was aware of that fact, yes.
Let the record reflect that I'm showing opposing counsel what is marked as Prosecution's Exhibit B. May I approach the witness, Your Honor? Could you tell us what that is, Detective Tarpon?
This appears to be a copy of the sex offender registration form that's used in the Harris County Sheriff's Office.
Would you say that is a true and accurate copy of the sex registration form?
Yes, I would.
And whose name is on that form?
The name Richard Grouper is filled out.
Thank you. May I approach the witness, Your Honor? At this point, Your Honor, we'd like to admit this into evidence as Prosecution's Exhibit B. And would you like a copy? And may we publish this to the jury? Did you speak to the defendant?
I attempted to interview Mr. Grouper, yes.
And what happened? Why did
he declined to interview.
Did he allow you to search his home?
He did, yes.
And what did you find when you searched his home?
In searching his home, I discovered in the basement of his house what appeared to be drops of blood. Several spots, in fact. I had a crime scene technician take a sample of them.
Whose DNA was located at the scene?
Well, the crime lab tested the sample of the blood spots, and it was of the spots, and it was determined that the substance was blood of Sarah's blood type. And the crime lab then tested the blood against the DNA obtained from Sarah's hair, and it was found to be a positive match. So Sarah's DNA is placed there. And we also discovered DNA evidence and fingerprints, naturally, of Mr. Grouper, the occupant of the home.
And did you find DNA in multiple locations of the defendant's home?
Yes, we did. Sarah's DNA was also found, again, in the form of blood spots and fingerprints. We were able to find that Sarah was present in Mr. Grouper's motorhome at some point before she disappeared.
Now, earlier you testified that the motorhome had disappeared. Did you ever find out what happened to the defendant's motorhome?
Yes. 3 days after Sarah disappeared, we actually got a call from a clerk at a 7-Eleven down Highway 202, about 16 miles away. The clerk reported that there was a motorhome parked and apparently abandoned on the lot of the 7-Eleven, and he wanted us to come tow it away. So we came to pick it up, and in the course of that investigation, we discovered that the motorhome belonged to the defendant, Mr. Richard Grouper.
Now, did you question Mr. Grouper, or the defendant, about this motorhome and its disappearance?
Yes, we tried to, yes.
And what did the defendant say about this motorhome?
Well, during the course of our investigation, and this is after we had actually arrested Mr. Grouper, we learned that Mr. Grouper was attempting to blame a friend of his for not only the abduction and murder of Sarah Salmon, but the theft of his motorhome in the process. He was trying to blame a certain Mr. David Mackerel for the crime.
Did you ask for assistance in locating this David Mackerel?
We did. We attempted to get contact information from Mr. Grouper, but he declined to give it to us. So we initiated a manhunt, a nationwide manhunt on our own initiative.
So you have not been able to find this David Mackerel?
No, we have not. And we have conducted such searches as examining the National Crime Information Center, looking for any kind of criminal record under that name. We asked for FBI assistance, and they lent us their resources. We checked driver's license records, Department of Health records, and we were unable to locate Mr. David Mackerel, although we were able to discover that a man named David Mackerel existed, at least that he lived outside of Reno in this state. But the address on the that we had listed by the name is no longer accurate.
All right, so going back to where the motorhome was found after the days after the days of its disappearance, you stipulated that it was a 7-Eleven clerk. Did you question outside of the 7-Eleven, did you question the clerk of the 7-Eleven?
Yes, I interviewed the clerk, and the clerk told me that she had discovered the motorhome on the lot the morning after her midnight shift. She worked the shops early morning shift, so from approximately, I would say around 1 o'clock in the morning or midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning until about 6 in the morning.
And what did the 7-Eleven clerk say to you?
The 7-Eleven clerk told me that the night that Sarah disappeared,
Or
August
excuse me,
13th,
let me rephrase that question, Your Honor. During your investigation of the 7-Eleven clerk, did you conduct a photo pack lineup?
yes, I did.
And who did the clerk point out in that lineup?
The clerk pulled the photograph of Mr. Richard Grouper from that pack.
And what time did the clerk claim that she saw the defendant?
The clerk claimed that she saw the defendant at 3 o'clock in the morning the night that Sarah had disappeared, and that this man answering Richard Grouper's description had not only walked into the store but had come and spoken directly to the clerk.
And how many days passed by the time you found the motorhome in front of the 7-Eleven and the night in question, and the night she disappeared again?
It was 3 days.
3 days. And did you search the motorhome?
We did search the motorhome, yes.
What did you find in the motorhome?
Well, after conducting a forensic investigation, we found Sarah's fingerprints. We found blood spots which positively matched the DNA we had found in the basement and in the hair sample. And we also found Mr. Grouper's fingerprints.
Did you find any fingerprints that could be to anybody else, such as a Mr. Mackerel maybe?
We did not find any other whole fingerprints, no, that could be used for identification.
Did you receive any information about the defendant's whereabouts the night of Sarah's disappearance?
We only have his statement, which is that he was at home in bed, presumably.
When was Sarah's body found again?
Sarah's body was found, if I remember correctly, approximately a week after the motorhome was discovered.
Where was the body located?
The body was located in the desert, about a mile outside of town. The body was discovered by some hikers.
Let the record reflect that I'm showing opposing counsel what is marked as Prosecution's Exhibit C. Your Honor, may I approach the witness? Is that a accurate copy or of a map of the area?
Well, it's not to scale, but this is a drawing that I put together, a diagram of the general area of where this crime is likely to have occurred and where the body was discovered in relation to the more important locations.
How far is the location of the body from the house?
About 16 miles.
How far was the body from the 7-Eleven?
Just about 1 mile.
And can you could you tell us the defendant's house in relation to that map? What's it labeled as?
Yes, looking at the diagram, the house where the defendant lived is labeled B on the map.
And where is the body found again? What is it labeled as?
The body's location is labeled D.
And Sarah's home, what's it labeled as?
It's labeled as A.
As A. Your Honor, may I approach the witness? At this point, Your Honor, I'd like to admit this into evidence. I'd also like to publish it to the jury, Your Honor. Thank you. Now, going back to this motorhome, did you find any evidence linking the motorhome to the crime scene of where Sarah's body was found?
We were able to link it. The location where the body was found was also a location where we found tire tracks, and we were able to take an imprint of the tire tracks, a cast of the tire tracks, and match them. We found that they matched the tires on Richard Grouper's motorhome exactly.
And when you found Sarah's body, what was the state of her body?
Her body had begun to decompose after exposure in the desert. The body itself was showed evidence of having been of having a gag been used before death, and when we discovered the body, the hands were also bound.
When you investigated Sarah's friends and teachers and neighbors, was there any testimony, or excuse me, during your investigation, did you find anybody to stipulate that the father, Mr. Salmon, was beating Sarah?
None of the neighbors offered any testimony to me that they knew of any beatings.
And when you found Sarah's body, was there any evidence of prior abuse?
None that I
before she died.
None that I noted. No.
No further questions for this witness, Your Honor.